Welcome, everyone. So good to be together tonight as we begin this sacred ground journey. We are so pleased to have two facilitators here, Betsy Schramm. Is it Schramm or Schramm, Betsy?
It's Americanized to Schramm.
Schramm. All right. I had a lesson in this just a few days ago. My tendency to mispronounce names. Schramm, from Church of the Redeemer here in Cincinnati, and Derek Peebles, who attends the cathedral, and is both of them have had experience with Sacred Ground, and Derek has facilitated this curriculum before. And so again, just really glad that both of them have stepped up to host us in this experience over the next few months. And I think from my experience with Sacred Ground at Church of the Redeemer, it's such a powerful, powerful formation opportunity, and a really wonderful invitation to be together in this way across all of our congregational boundaries, and to really form and grow when it comes to the work of becoming beloved community. So thank you again so much for saying yes and for showing up. Just a little bit of technical, like housekeeping kinds of stuff. Just wanted to let you know, again, we're going to be recording each one of these sessions so that they will be available to those that cannot be here. We also are going to, after each session, do what we kind of call a harvest, which is to capture all the things that we generate together during our time and send that out. So any prayers or meditations that we use, anything that you share in the chat, we will kind of compile all of that and share that out after. And so hopefully that'll allow you to just kind of sit back and relax and sink into the experience, knowing that we're going to be capturing that for you. We are also going to be asking everyone, just for the sake of presencing and inviting us to really listen, to just mute yourselves. I'm sure that most of us are accustomed to this now, but just another reminder to do that. And I think that's it. So with that, Betsy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amy. I would like to open us with a welcoming prayer by Father Thomas Keating. I open this as an invitation for all of us to the larger presence of God in our midst, of what is challenging us at this time, and to help us just let go and get centered. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome everything that comes to me today because I know it's for my healing. I welcome all thoughts, feelings, emotions, and persons, situations, and conditions. I let go of my desire for power and control. I let go of my desire for affection, esteem, approval, and pleasure. I let go of my desire for survival and security. I let go of my desire to change any situation, condition, person, or myself. I open to the love and presence of God and God's action within. Amen. My name is Betsy Schramm. As you saw, I am from the Church of the Redeemer in Cincinnati. For those of you that may recognize me that aren't from Redeemer, I served on the Stewardship Commission for 15 years. And currently, the Stewardship Commission was dissolved a few years ago. And currently, I work in an independent bookstore and am surrounded by materials that keep me interested in this conversation. And I'm happy to provide copies of our core texts if you need them. Just either email me or put it in the chat that you need a copy, and I can get them in the mail to you. We have provided a discount on the website, and several of you have ordered them. I saw that. Thank you very much. I started my social justice work really back in the 60s. So I've been at it a while, and I really look forward to our journey together. Derek?
Thanks, Betsy, and hello, everyone. I am glad to be here with you all, especially today and over the next several months. Derek Peebles, I have lived in Cincinnati since 2006. I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky, And I've been working in the field of community development, economic development for over 10 years here in Cincinnati. And like Amy had said earlier on, I come and attend Christ Church Cathedral downtown. I've also been involved on the Taft Lecture Series, and I was on the Strategic Planning Committee. And I've done some work previously, like Amy said, with Beloved Community and the Sacred Ground curriculum, with the St. Simon's Episcopal Church, and facilitated some interchurch gatherings with other Episcopal churches in the Mill Creek Valley. So I'm coming to you all from that experience, and a lot of my work in Cincinnati has really revolved around how we change the conversation around tough issues like this: equity, racial justice. And so I'm very committed to this effort, and I've spent a lot of time working with youth and organizations on connecting the dots. Cross-cultural collaboration, I think, is really important. And so I'm just happy to be with you all. Thanks.
We will be starting off with a video from our presiding bishop, Michael Curry's trip to on a justice pilgrimage in Ghana. It'll be a relatively short video, but one that I think is a good introduction.
tortured here, were held in bondage here, and were carted off from here like they were cattle. They wept, they slept in their own excrement. The beautiful sound of the ocean was a sound of terror. They had never seen it or heard it before. And they were going somewhere they didn't even know. I was really thinking of it as a kind of homecoming for me as an African American, knowing that we were going to be coming to the places of slaves, enslavement, and embarkation, and that terrible journey through the Middle Passage to the Americas. Knowing that was a way of returning sort of to the roots of who I am. W.B. Du Bois, in his book, The Souls of Black Folk, once spoke of being black in America as two warring souls in one dogged body. And the truth is, I've lived a life of two souls in one body, African and American, black and Episcopalian. And I've lived with that reality since I was a child. All you have to do is go into your family history and you will see paradoxes galore in all of our families. And the same is true for me, even as an African American man, as the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, a church that did participate and very often blessed some of the horrors that happened here. It was a hell on earth. We were in a chapel above the dungeon where people were being tortured. And at one point, it was an Anglican chapel. Prayers from the 1662 prayer book were prayed while people were being damned below. That is a horrible paradox to have to live. And yet, on the other hand, those who survived lived long enough for children to be born from them and for generations to come from them. And what they endured, they did not endure in vain. And so somehow standing here in this place is somewhere between heaven and hell. And for me, it is a place of real recommitment. My hope is that this journey will help us to reclaim and reface a common history that we have, a painful past, not for the sake of guilt, but for the sake of all of us, black, white, red, yellow, and brown, finding ways to face our past and then to turn in a new direction and create a new future. This may be a moment when the churches may lead the societies to find another way. The church blessed this once, but we must never bless any of the mutated, cancerous forms of hatred ever again. We must bless the world by a love that is meant for all and a love that will never be stopped. We follow Jesus, who had to endure the paradox of hatred in the midst of love, and he did it. We can do it. As the Episcopal Church, we can do it as Americans.
Now that I love you, there's no turning back. Now that I love you, there's no turning back.
Thank you, Amy. We really are so glad to have all of you with us. And if you've looked at the course syllabus, you probably saw that it was set up for 4-hour sessions. Oh, how we would love to have that kind of time with you. But Zoom exhaustion's real, and I think we all know it. So we are limited to an hour and a half. And that means that we have to ask a lot from you in doing the work, in watching the videos between each session, in doing the readings. We won't be able to review them so much during each session, but we can certainly use them and bring them up as we meet in our large group and small group sessions, which we will be doing frequently. We won't, we won't have a lot of videos to watch, but they will all be brief. So the ones that are on the website for the syllabus are much longer and will be important for you to reach your helpful in your understanding. Becoming Beloved Community is the Episcopal Church's long-term commitment to racial healing, reconciliation, and justice. In the first session, there's a summary sheet that Amy's going to be putting up for you to look at. Some of you may have already seen it. It gives you the big picture of what Becoming Beloved Community is all about. And I encourage you to, I think Amy will provide that in the harvest at the end, just to make sure you do see it. But as she puts it up for us now, she'll review the significance of the labyrinth that has been adopted as the symbol for what we will be doing.
Thanks, Betsy. So, so as Betsy said, I dropped the link to this document in the chat just to make it easy. So if you want to have access right now, you can. But as Betsy said, Becoming Beloved Community is really offered up in the form of a labyrinth. And it's talked about as a fourfold path. And there's 4 different areas of this fourfold path, including telling the truth, proclaiming the dream, practicing the way of love, and repairing the breach. And under each one of these areas, we're offered questions that kind of guide both our understandings of what these areas mean, but also as a way to start to think about how we might move through them. And one of the things I really love about the fourfold path and the labyrinth as a symbol or as a model for that is that, as you can see when you look at this labyrinth, it really is this like ongoing process. So it's not a linear process. It's not something that we're going to ever reach in our lifetime. It's a lifelong commitment. And it's the kind of process that just when you think that you've arrived, you realize, oh, I have some continue learning to do. And so you're brought right back out to another place in the journey. Another thing that you'll see, both in terms of the model, but also as we practice together, is that these 4 areas, telling the truth, proclaiming the dream, practicing the way of love, and repairing the breach, they are not independent of one another. They're very much interrelated and interconnected. So much so that oftentimes it feels like one kind of moves into another. And so as we've engaged in this work in our diocese, for example, we've oftentimes found and kind of named telling the truth is more than just telling the truth, that it's also a form of repairing the breach. It's also a form of sometimes proclaiming the dream. And so I think the way that it's designed as a way to really do the work of following Jesus and bringing forth healing and justice in our world really is such a beautiful, transformative approach. The other thing I wanted to say about this is, this Becoming Beloved Community, the fourfold path, is rooted in our baptismal vows and our baptismal promise. So each one of these areas is rooted and based in one of our specific baptismal promises. And so I wanted to just walk us through this because I feel like it's really important to acknowledge this and to root ourselves in this. Oftentimes we get the questions from folks, well, why is this important or relevant to us? How is this related to the work of the church? Or, we're an all-white congregation, and how is the work of anti-racism or racial justice relevant? And the answer to that is simple, and yet also obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but also complex. But it's because this is the work of the church. It's because we are committed as Christians to following Jesus. And it goes right back to our baptismal promise. So this isn't just a one-off thing or a project. This is who we are as Christians. And so telling the truth about church and race is related to the baptismal promise we make around persevering and resisting evil. And wherever you fall into sin, repent and return to the Lord. Our baptismal promise that we will proclaim by word and example the good news of Christ and of God in Christ is related directly to proclaiming the dream of beloved community. The baptismal promise that we will seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving our neighbors as ourselves, is about practicing the way of love. And finally, our baptismal promise around we will strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being is related to repairing the breach in society and institutions. So just calling our attention back to that and rooting back into the very basic, essential aspect of who we are as Christians and who we are as Episcopalians.
So having participated in the program that was originally introduced to me as Becoming Beloved Community, I quickly realized that Sacred Ground, it represents the syllabus that was put together by Katrina Brown. She did this for the Episcopal Church nationally, and it is the syllabus that we have adopted for this program. There's another document that she put together with James Perry that is, I think, also very important and part of the session 1 syllabus, but it's farther down the bottom, so you may not have seen it. And it's a handout that we were supposed to give you today, and is called The Key Distinctions for Understanding Race and Racism. Given that we are coming from such a variety of locations, communities, and life experiences, I think it's really important to read through this handout and understand the distinctions. We all sort of have this preconceived idea that we know what racism is, but there are just so many elements that need to be considered. And if we're going to have this conversation, it will help us translate really what type of situation we're referring to. For example, intentional racism versus implicit racial bias versus microaggressions. Those are the kind of things that is just helping us differentiate. So again, we'll get you that link and make sure you have it, but it is part of that on the syllabus for this first session. On the screen, we're going to just take a quick look at the 10-week syllabus so that you can see where we're headed. Clearly today we're introducing the whole concept, but the program itself, or the journey that we will be going on, will meet every other Sunday, except we found that Thanksgiving weekend was going to be one of those Sundays. And we decided that a few people may try and be with family or may not want to make that commitment over Thanksgiving weekend. So we skipped that week, and that's the week, the 4th session we'll take a 3-week break and go back to our 2-week after that. So as you can see, today's the introduction in session 1. We'll discuss the roots of race. Then we'll get into indigenous history, which, quite frankly, I think surprised a lot of people in my group when we looked at it. We just saw an introduction to the transatlantic slave trade, clearly having major impact on this country. And then we go into the Latino history and Asian Pacific history. The roots of racism go way back into many of our immigrated citizens. And then we get into the depth of the African-American story. We will look at it, as you can see, over the 1830s all the way up to the 60s, and hopefully you'll take us into the conversation today. Divisions in white America are many and wide. Then we get into the legacies of racism. And finally, we have the conversation. Where do we go from here? What are we being called to do now that we've had the opportunity to start this journey? So I really look forward to having conversations in and around each and one of these subjects. And now Derek will discuss what our goals for Sacred Ground really are.
Thank you, Betsy. And again, it's really good to be with you all here today. And so as we kind of explained before, we're taking kind of a 3-hour session into 90 minutes. And so we're going to be kind of testing out, a few strategies for today. One of them is going to include the dialogue circles, and which is also important to this curriculum. And so prior to kind of talking about and kind of creating a context for that, like Betsy said, we'll go over the goals of Sacred Ground. And let's see, Amy, did you have a slide for that? Great, thank you. And so ultimately, we have a lot of tasks and goals throughout this series, and most important is for us to locate ourselves within the story of race and racism, knowing that this is a difficult conversation, but being able to locate ourselves is something that I will discuss kind of in our community agreements. Second would be to increase our knowledge of racism and current racial inequalities in our country, but also in the role of the Episcopal Church in the history of racism. As we saw in the video from Michael Carey, he's identified that the Episcopal Church does have a history with race and racism as well. Third, to increase our awareness of existing justice and healing efforts. And I think that's what we are in a phase of right now is understanding how we can all heal from racism by increasing our awareness and telling our stories, which is a lot of the point of the dialogue circles. Next is strengthen a commitment to ongoing learning about racism and anti-racism work. Next is to grow into our spiritual formation as followers of Jesus. And last is to spark a heart connection that leads to individual and communal action. And Amy, is the next slide I think I am to go over is the community agreements. Here we go. Thank you. Community agreement. So creating brave spaces. Before I really get into the bullet points of this slide here, I would like to kind of create a context around, the engagement piece of this series, because, we live in a world where the belief is that the way we create conversations that overcome the fragmented nature of our communities is really what creates that alternative future. And so obviously, I can assume that each and every one of you are here on this call because, we want to learn about our roles within racism and unpacking the history, but also how do we overcome racism and how do we move into a future where we all appreciate each other's gifts and assets that places us within God's image. And so understanding conversations that overcome the fragmented nature of our communities is really how we create that alternative future. It's really how we create that sacred space. And so this could really be a difficult stance to take, for we have a deeply held belief that the way to make a difference in the world is to define problems and needs, but then recommend actions to solve those needs. And so as Americans, we're all problem solvers and we're action oriented and we are results minded. And we actually see it as a problem if we leave a meeting without a to-do list. We want those measurable outcomes and we want them now. But the most important thing to realize, and what's hard to grasp, is that this is really the very mindset that prevents anything fundamentally from changing. And so we're not going to be able to problem solve our way into fundamental change or transformation. And it's not an argument against problem solving, but it's an intention to shift the context and the language around how we come together in this sacred space. And for that is which problem solving really kind of takes place. It's that authentic transformation and the shift in context and the shift in the language and the shift in the conversation. It's about changing our idea of what really constitutes action. And so the fact that each and every one of you all are here today and agreed to go through this series with us really kind of opens up and really tells us that you are here to solve a problem. But we will shift the context in which we do that, which is going to be the importance of how you break up into small groups. So for community agreements and really kind of creating those brave spaces, we want to listen carefully and deeply, and we want to speak from personal experience. We want to make space, and then we also want to take space. We want to share our stories. We want to be comfortable with silence and wonder if silence is performative. And what that means to me is that silence is also communication. And to me, silence doesn't make me uncomfortable because I know people are in deep thought and people are really kind of maybe waiting for a response or waiting for someone to speak before them. And in this sacred space, we have to understand and we have to agree as a community that we all have a story to share, no matter how, hurtful or painful that story may be. And so we want to make space for that. We want to assume our best intent and attend to impact. We want to engage tension and acknowledge it as an opportunity for growth. Do not freeze ourselves or others in time. We want to recognize and honor the differences we bring. Yes, and both and. But we also want to expect and accept discomfort and unfinished business. We want to honor confidences, and we want to value the process as much as, if not more than, you value the outcomes. And so it really involves practicing trusting ourselves and each other, trusting God, and expect joy.
We skipped over one that was the, wait, why am I talking?
Oh, we did.
Aren't I talking? And that wasn't an oversight. That's one that we have to just give some thought to when we go to speak. The small group sessions will be brief, unfortunately, because of our timing. So today we'll be breaking into small group sessions of roughly 20 minutes time, which would give us about 4 minutes per person. So just before you take over a space, think about why am I not talking? Am I afraid of something? Do I not want to share? And why am I talking? So the weight was important in our group.
Yes, yes. I don't know how I skipped that. Thanks, Betsy. That was an oversight. So looking at kind of, I guess, is there any questions regarding those community agreements?
Or anything else you've heard?
Because our next step is really to kind of break into small groups and kind of, this is the introductory session, but, if there's no other questions, then I will kind of go into some brief discussion or brief instructions, about our discussion groups.
Just so folks know, I did drop the link to a document that includes the covenant so that you can have that. So just notice that.
And Amy, as our technological guru, will be just randomly assigning everybody to small groups. So we've anticipated groups of 4 to at least allow good conversation to take place. If you get too many in a group, sometimes not everyone gets a chance to speak, and we want all of you to have the opportunity to share.
Mm-hmm. And so we're actually kind of ahead of time, but I think that that'll give us kind of more time to debrief and talk about kind of what struck you in your group conversations. And so we originally had, I think, 15 minutes. Is that right, Betsy, for this first
20.
breakout? 20. Okay. So the kind of some things to be mindful of as far as the community agreements are concerned, and as Betsy lined out, is that we'll have 20 minutes. We'll break up into small groups of 4. And so that should give everyone ample time to speak, and this would also be the time for you all to introduce yourselves to each other if you are with someone you don't know. And the real goal of this is to share our stories, because we've all showed up, we've accepted the invitation to be here, and a lot of this curriculum really kind of involves the co-learning and the sacred space that we're in together. And so knowing that we don't have a whole lot of time or any time really to kind of review the materials, I will kind of list a few questions as you all go into your into your discussion groups. These are some questions that will help your group kind of start the discussion that I would like for you all to think about based on the session 1 materials. And so number one is introductions, but also to kind of name and to talk about why you accepted the invitation. And so more concrete is what drew you to Sacred Ground. And many of you all may have had experience with this before, but I think it's really good to revisit it for people in your groups that may be their first time joining such a session and such a group. And so one of the questions is what drew you to Sacred Ground? And why are we saying yes to the invitation to explore the history of race and racism? So I'll repeat that. Definitely introduce yourselves and kind of where you come from, and want to name what drew you to Sacred Ground. Why did you say yes to the invitation to explore the history of race and racism? Is there any questions about that? Okay. And so it's 5:10, it's 10 after 5 right now. And so we'll have 20 minutes in our breakout groups. And Amy, would you like to review kind of any technical? I think, if someone needs to kind of leave a group, or if someone ends up in a group by themselves, there is something that they can click to kind of get back to the main room.
Yeah.
Did you want to list kind of any of that?
Yeah. Thanks, Derek. So I put the questions that you offered to Derek in the chat so that you have them there. If you have never done breakout rooms before on Zoom, just a quick kind of like, here's how it'll work. You've been divided up into groups of 4. There's one group of 3. And what's going to happen is there's just going to be a button that moves across the screen, and all you have to do is just click that, and it'll take you right into the breakout room. And then when it's time to come back, you're going to have another button that comes across your screen, and you can either click it right away, or you can wait until you're automatically swooshed back in. So you have like 1 minute warning when that button comes across. But you will not get lost in the ethers. So I promise you will not. If for whatever reason you want to leave your group, there's going to be a couple of buttons on the lower right-hand screen, and you can either leave your room or leave the call entirely. And so I think that's it.
Okay.
If you need assistance in your group, you can there's a button at the bottom of your screen where you can just request help or request someone, and Derek or Betsy and I will pop in and check in on you. But that's it. And Derek, how long do we say, Derek and Betsy? 20 minutes, you said, or 25?
Well, we're starting with 20, and then we'll come back as a large group and hope that each group will share with us something that came out from their discussion.
Beautiful. Yeah. So I will give you all like a 3-minute warning so that you know that time is wrapping up, and then we will see you back here in the main room.
Okay.
All right. So enjoy, everybody.
Sure. Welcome back.
Okay. So do we still have some coming back? Looks like it.
Yeah. They're waiting to the last second.
Well, that's good.
They're holding on.
A sign the conversations are still going.
Christopher, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Well, you are in sacred space.
Show off.
I'm just pretending to be in sacred space. That's just a virtual background.
You're one of those that know how to do that.
My computer won't do it. I know how, but my computer's not spiffy enough.
Mine's too old too.
Oh, is that why I can't? I tried.
And I got kicked out of one space in our house to another space, but this space has a door. I can be by myself. It's fine.
Yeah, well, welcome back, everybody. And I hope that you all got to definitely introduce yourselves if you were in groups of people that you didn't know. And we are looking forward to learning about what you discussed. And so just to kind of recap on the questions that we were posing as part of our discussions is really what drew you to Sacred Ground and why you accepted the invitation and why are you saying yes to exploring the history of race or racism. We have to understand as well, and through our stories on why it is important to understand racism and the historic struggle for racial justice in our country. And so we all, with these sessions, we have readings and things like that we have to do to help us guide us in our learning, but also to help guide us in our conversation. But knowing that this is kind of the introductory kind of session, we want to spend the next several minutes learning about what struck you in your conversations. And so I would like to invite anybody out there that would be willing to discuss for a minute or two about really what struck you, why you yourself accepted the invitation and what kind of struck you from what you heard in your group. And I'll open up the floor if anybody wants to speak. And so there is a reaction button on your screen if you kind of want to raise your hand. And yeah, I think, well, I can see that on my end, but it looks like, there's about 34 of us in this big room discussion. So anyone out there in your groups that would be willing to discuss kind of what struck you?
In our group, I would think each of the white participants talked about never really being aware. And Pam asked us, why did it take, this is how I interpret, why did it take you so long? And that is one of the questions that I'm trying to answer.
Thank you, Paul. And Paul, which congregation are you with?
I'm with Church of the Advent in Walnut Hills in Cincinnati.
Thank you.
I'm Peg Kissel. I attend St. John's in Columbus. And in our small group, what I heard as one of the recurring themes was that the episode, the incident with George Floyd was a final straw for many of us who have been maybe on this journey in certain ways individually and felt that this was a response to something we might do to help our country not, one person said, not implode.
Thank you. Thank you. Michelle, it looks like you have a hand up. I don't know if that's on accident, but you have the floor if you want to speak. Michelle Dayton.
No, that was not accidental. That was
okay.
But I can lower it now. So there were a couple of things. One is, one thing that came up was the dream of becoming a beloved community in our group, that that the three of us had been at this, doing something, at least internal work, for a while, and looking for ways to discover what we don't know, as well as gain more, not only information, but transformation. And even amongst the three of us, we noticed some internal diversity. I mean, it's three white women, and yet the difference in our immigrant experience was pretty significant. And so that was interesting. Thank you.
Mm. That is interesting. Thank you, Michelle. You know,
I don't want to speak. Don't really want to speak for everybody in the group, but I think we were all white, and I think our commonality was that we were all raised in isolation from Black people, and there in one case it was an isolation driven by prejudice. In the other cases, it was just that there wasn't, we were just in our white world with no contact with Black people. And I think the terms of being people who were just unconsciously raised with white privilege came up.
Hmm. You know, Elliot, thank you for your comment. And I really kind of want to go back to your comment, Elliot, and Paul's comment that he made at the beginning. And I have a short story that I would like to share. Not being from Cincinnati, you know, I moved here after college in 2006. I'm 38 years old, you know, born in 1982. And throughout this process and throughout my work with Sacred Ground and with the Episcopal Church, I've found myself going back to my dad and asking him for stories. My dad, you know, I really should know this because his birthday was just in March, but we're all getting older and losing track. Here's what I do know. My dad graduated high school in 1968. So I think he's around 73 or something like that. And, you know, he grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, not far from here. And I asked him, you know, Dad, you know, looking at, and this was after the 2016 election when we were really kind of, you know, seeing a lot of rhetoric around, you know, race and a lot of racial epithets, obviously. But I asked my dad, who's more of kind of a moderate and has been moderate, you know, his whole life. He kind of served as a state senator for the state of Kentucky. One of the first Black representatives around Louisville to represent, you know, our town in the legislature. I asked him, I was like, Dad, what's different from the 60s to now? And he told me, he was like, Derek, he was like, things were bad back in the 60s. And I was a teenager. And so I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood in Louisville. And I'll tell you, quite honestly, I grew up most of my years not being faced with racism at all until I was an adult. He was like, in Louisville, you know, they had segregation, but for the most part, you know, if we wanted to go to a movie or to a film or to a theater downtown, we weren't allowed in there on the weekends, but for the most part, the owners took our money and they let us in. It was like, I really, you know, there was a real race riot in Louisville back in the late 60s that really kind of tore the community apart. So I asked him about this and where we're at today and where we've been. And I found myself asking a lot of, you know, white men his age that I've worked with in Cincinnati, you know, what's different now? Has things gotten any better whatsoever? And I don't get a whole lot of answers to those questions. But as an adult, the first real time I was faced with racism, because I grew up in a predominantly white community where my parents told me I had to be the best at everything in order to be recognized and in order to, you know, get the things that I wanted. My dad moved us out of the Black community during the 80s when the crack epidemic was really hitting Black communities really hard. And his reasons were, I wanted to put my kids in a better school. And so what my dad realized later on is that, you know, he took us out of the Black community when he started to economically mobilize himself and getting better jobs and better work. He was like, Derek, I was chasing the American dream that was not built for Black people. He was like, if I had to do it all over again, I would have stayed in my community and I would have allowed my dollars to circulate locally. we get into this phase to where we're chasing a dream that's not necessarily designed for everyone. And then my dad starts going off on a tangent like I am now, talking about redlining and all these things that really kind of kept Black communities from thriving. Years later, I'm working in a bank, and right down here in Bellevue, Kentucky. And if you had any issues with your accounts, you came to see me. If you wanted a loan, you came to see me. There was this white guy that came in regularly. He always spoke to me. He always said, hey, but he always dealt with the other personal banker in our branch, who was a white lady who was from the community of Bellevue. And she was out of town for like a week on vacation. This guy was having a real problem with his mortgage and coming in every day looking for Stacy, who was my business partner. And you know, for a couple of days, I was like, sir, I can help you if there's anything you need. You know, I'll be willing to, you know, because I know it kind of seems like you have some, you're in a rush or have some a problem that needs to be dealt with. I'll be willing to help you. He reluctantly sat down, and after a few days of working out this guy's mortgage, we got to talking and got to know each other a little bit. When I closed his second mortgage and stood up and shook his hand, he was so happy. He shook my hand, kind of gave me a little bit of a hug, and he said, Derek, you know what? You're pretty cool for a Black guy.
Yeah.
So what do I do at that point? It's kind of like, I've spent 3 days with this guy. You know, he's never, ever, you know, met or sat down with me, but anytime he came in, he always, you know, gave me a heads up. He recognized that I was there and he said hello and things like that. He would walk right out. You know, if he had a problem, he dealt with our other banker. But this one time he had to deal with me. Yeah. And it made me think, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, this guy's really starting to warm up to me. And then he said that after I spent countless hours resolving his debt issue, refinancing his mortgage. And he says, Derek, you're pretty cool for a Black guy. Thanks for helping me. I was like, what? Well, what? Well, like, wow, what do I do?
Just respond.
This goes back to, but I'll tell you, there's a little bit of a sweet ending to that story, because that older white man became one of my most trusted clients. And I was able to help him during the economic crisis of 2009, during the real downturn where we were all losing our mortgages and becoming in debt and underwater. And I still talk to this guy today, and I have not been in banking in over 10 years. And so it's a story that I share because obviously I think the comment he made to me was racist. But then I had to think, well, was it racist or was he just kind of ignorant because maybe he had never met a Black man before? Mm-hmm. And, you know, Elliot and your comment kind of made me think about that. And kind of when you said that we just haven't had much interaction with people of other color. And so we kind of are in this bubble. And the other comment that the guy, his name is escaping me right now, but it made me think about that too. And so it goes back to Betsy, the handout that we meant to hand out today around the distinctions of racism, because I had to report that to my boss because I just felt hurt. And I honestly don't believe that guy intentionally said that to harm me after I had just helped him refinance his mortgage. But it was a real lack of awareness in what he said and what it made me think about him, but also that community. And eventually it made me so uncomfortable that I was asked, I asked to be taken out of that branch because it just, how many other customers came into that branch and did not ask me for help because I was Black. And so that's what I think about. And I'm so happy to be facilitating this discussion because it really causes us to think about those distinctions of racism and the fact that we have not really taken the time to learn about each other's cultures from an asset-based perspective is really the reasons why we have a lot of these issues today. But I went on a tangent, I'm sorry, but it was a story based on the comments that I kind of really felt like I wanted to go into. So we're at 5:50 right now. Is there any other comments about what struck you in your sessions or in your breakout groups? Anything that struck you?
One thing about history that we were taught, what we were taught was not correct. And so that I thought that was a really important point, that we need to come to terms with our history. And in terms of racism and our future. So,
You'll see
for the
much
future.
more of that coming in the future materials.
Yes, thanks, Kathy.
Speaking of materials, I don't quite understand how the syllabus works, because when I looked for this session, there were some of the readings, a couple of the readings that had links, and I went right to them. And the other readings, I would click on them and nothing would happen. And I don't quite understand that. Were we supposed to buy additional books in order to be able to read these things?
There are two core texts, the Waking Up White and Jesus and the Disinherited.
Yeah.
Okay.
I understand that, but there were little readings on the syllabus under the first session, short ones from excerpts from books and things like that. And I couldn't access them because the
link wasn't hot.
No.
They aren't hot links in the syllabus, but if you go from the syllabus to the page where it says session 1, those are all hot links.
Good.
From the syllabus to the page where it says session 1.
So maybe just quickly, I'll quickly share my screen here, and so we can all take a look at this together.
That's a good thing. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah. So, so Elliot, I know you're not alone in this too, so it's good to just spend a minute on here. So hopefully you all got the link and the password to access this. And so this will take you right here. And I think, you can go here to access the syllabus. But as Michelle was saying, if you click on each one of these buttons, so for example, here, session 1 will take you into session 1. And here you're going to find, you'll find the links to the films that are available, but then you'll also find a link to all the readings here as well.
I didn't see that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just a lot. So again, like what you're going to find is here under each of the sessions will take you directly to all the materials.
And this is the screen that says welcome when you get on it. Okay.
When you click the link to access the materials, it'll bring you right to this. This is like the landing page for Sacred Ground.
So for our next session, we should have completed whatever's under session 2.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And speaking of session 2, there will be a lot less in the way of Derek and I doing all of the talking. We will be inviting you to participate much more. And so hopefully, as you read these materials and go through them, we will discuss them in both large group and small group formats. A lot more interaction.
Right. And today was really kind of to test that out kind of in your small groups today around the introductory question of why we accepted this invitation in the first place. And so really thank everyone who spoke for your comments. And like Betsy said, part of our co-learning and part of us moving through this sacred ground is through the personal storytelling and the sharing. And so we definitely look forward to that because most of the interaction will be based around the materials that you'll find in those links that Amy just shared. So, it looks like we are 5 minutes up to the 6 o'clock hour, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think that Amy, just real quick, are we sending out the links ahead of time, or are we just expecting participants to, as far as like the materials and things like that? Because the fact that we have such, we only have 90 minutes, we may, Betsy and I may select specific readings for each week to align with our time frame. So Betsy or Amy, did you all want to comment on that, or when like the materials if we'll put them out, or we will just expect people to go to the website?
I think we'll address that probably through email if there's specifics. Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good. I think for now you can all of you can access the overall, like the entire set of materials and readings and everything on the website that you have. But if there are specific ones that Derek and Betsy select, we will send that out in an email in the constant contact. And if you all have any questions about any of this, feel free to reach out to either Derek or Betsy, but also me for any tech support or any, in terms of like access to the links and stuff like that. But we will certainly be in touch with you and let you know if there's selected readings and film screenings to watch.
Right now, I plan on doing all of session 2. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I guess next we will close this session with a closing prayer. But real quick, Michelle, I saw your comment. Would you consider that interaction with the banking customer to be a microaggression? I think so. I honestly didn't know how to feel about that. It was strange that the guy did not want to deal with anyone else after I helped him refinance his mortgage. So, that's kind of what I stick to because, it's part of my job. That's my job, is to build relationships. And maybe, just maybe, me helping him may have helped him think differently about other races. So after many prayers about that, that's kind of what I've come to. And I think our continued relationship after that, we're not friends, we don't really hang out. But he found me on Facebook years ago after I left the bank, and every once in a while, he'll stay in touch. It's weird. I don't make sense of it, but it's what's happened. So thanks for that comment and that question. Okay. All right. So with our closing prayer
Can we do the Langston Hughes poem first?
Oh, yes. And Betsy, if you have that, because I'm not.
Yes, Amy will put it up. I'm happy to do it. Many of you may be familiar with this, but it's one that I grew up with. It's always meant a lot, said a lot. I Too, by Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America.
Thank you, Betsy. And so now I'll end with our closing prayer from the Book of Common Prayer. Oh God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth, that in your good time, all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Praying us out.
Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thank you all.
Thank
We'll
you.
see in 2 weeks.
Can I ask a question? The readings for the next week, are they, is that going to be considered session 2?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And there's a lot there.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Hope everyone
Also, will we have access to the recordings?
Yes.
of these
I will
sessions.
make these
yeah.
available. So the recordings to the videos and all the other resources that we share, including the chat stuff, will be shared in a harvest that'll be coming out right after.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. All right.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care,
Thank
everybody.
you.
All.
Thank you.